Hello, this is Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to this channel and supporting this channel. Thank you for supporting both of my channels. I appreciate your subscribing and your feedback. I look forward to reading your comments. And today is the final installment of Mrs. Mary McCleod Bethune. She founded a college for black girls in 1905 in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is still thriving today in 2023. In the last installment, Mrs. Bethune had been able to solicit donors for the Daytona Educational and Industrial Training School. John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and James Gamble of Procter & Gamble were three of her donors. Their generous donations allowed her to grow the campus and increase its curriculum. By 1923, Mrs. Bethune's school had grown into a junior college, which merged with the Cookman Institute for Boys. This gave needed financial support and academic stature to the school. It was renamed the Bethune-Cookman College. At that time, the school had an enrollment of 794 students and 42 faculty members. The original investment of $1.50 had been rewarded by more than $100,000 in buildings and equipment. The little cabin had been replaced by a beautiful campus which had 32 acres of land and 14 buildings. Mrs. Bethune acknowledged that she was inspired by what Booker T. Washington was doing at Tuskegee. She often attended the conferences held at Tuskegee Institute under the direction of Dr. Booker T. Washington. It was at one of these conferences that she conceived another idea, the community conference. When she returned to Daytona, she planned, organized, and brought into being a conference and baby show for the whole county. Prizes were awarded for the finest vegetables, jellies, and needlework. The women proudly presented their babies to show how well cared for they were. They exchanged ideas and listened to advice on baby care. Mrs. Bethune offered a prize for the best kept cabin and yard. This gave her the opportunity to drive around the county on inspection tours. The conference idea spread to other counties. The competitive spirit which the conferences produced made many Negroes more conscious about improving their lives. As one of the nation's leading educators, Mrs. Bethune spoke to groups all over the country. She became one of America's most powerful orators. She was a personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt, a friend and advisor to President Coolidge and President Hoover. In November 1930, she was invited by President Hoover to the general session of the White House Conference on Child Health and Protection. The following year, she was invited to the President's Conference on Home Building and Home Ownership. Her most dramatic conference came in 1934 when Mrs. Bethune was invited to the White House to discuss the National Youth Administration Program. She pleaded so effectively in behalf of the young Negro that she was chosen to serve on the advisory committee of the Nation Youth Administration. For more than 20 years, Mrs. Bethune was a special advisor on minority affairs to both President Roosevelt and President Truman. Her forthrightness, courage, and vision caused her to become a diplomatic link between the Negro and white worlds. Oh, gee. Mrs. Bethune received a large number of honors, citations, trophies, and awards. In 1935, she was awarded the coveted Spring-earned gold medal for outstanding achievement. In 1936, she was elected president of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which was founded by none other than Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Mrs. Bethune considered her honorary degree of Doctor of Humanities from Rollins College in 1949 one of the most rewarding experiences of her life. I can't imagine why. This honor was awarded by one of the oldest colleges for whites in the South, and she considered that a great honor, okay? The day she received the award, she was reminded of an invitation that had been extended to her and then retracted by the college. So now they're giving her an honorary doctorate, although they wouldn't let her speak years earlier. Okay, so once you prove yourself and then become accepted by them, then you're supposed to be overjoyed because they give you a useless award. Okay, moving right along. The trustees at that time would not appear on the same speaking platform with a Negro, but yet she gonna go take an award from him. Okay. For some time, Mrs. Bethune had suffered from severe asthmatic attacks. Doctors at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore decided that she needed an operation. Johns Hopkins had no private rooms for Negroes in the surgical or medical division, but they did find a room for her in another department. Mrs. Bethune asked for a Negro surgeon when she learned that every nurse and doctor on staff was white. There are two distinguished Negro physicians in the city, she persisted. May they participate or at least observe the work? I don't blame her. She wanted an all-white team operating on her. At least let a Negro be here to be a witness. She won her point. Both physicians were invited. Ever since that time, there have been Negro doctors on the staff of the hospital. Sometimes all you have to do is speak up. She called them racist without calling them racist. You are a racist. There are competent black doctors in this city. Why don't you have one on your staff? She didn't even have to say that. She just said, I want one of them in the room when you do your work on me. During Mrs. Bethune's 6-week stay at Johns Hopkins, she taught lesson after lesson in race relations. How ironic is that? A person whose family had to come through slavery was in the middle of Jim Crow, redlining, peonage, and everything else, and she's trying to teach them about race relations. What she's really doing is trying to teach them how to treat other people, teaching them how to be a human being. Mrs. Bethune was a symbol of courage and devotion. She vigorously practiced Christianity throughout her life. Her faith in the value of the individual is summed up in her famous quotation, "Invest in a human soul. It may be a diamond in the rough." After a life devoted to the service of her race and her country, Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune died at the age of 79 on May 18, 1955. In her last will and testament, she wrote, "I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave you the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you a thirst for education. I leave you a respect for the use of power. I leave you faith. I leave you racial dignity. I leave you a desire to live harmoniously with your fellow man. I leave you a responsibility to our young people." And that is the end of this biography of Mrs. Mary McCleod Bethune. Let me add that this is just a biographical sketch of her life. This is in no way comprehensive. There's a lot more to Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune. This book just had basically summaries of great Black Americans. But I would like to share a story of my late Sunday school teacher. When I was a young lady, came to a new church in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I had a Sunday school teacher who had attended Tuskegee Institute during the days of George Washington Carver and Mrs. Mary McCleod Bethune. Booker T. Washington had died by that time. And what she said about George Washington Carver was that he was so soft-spoken that his voice was softer than Michael Jackson's. But what she said about Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune was startling. She said one evening after classes were over, they were in a dorm playing cards, probably drinking, having a good time, and then they got the message that they were to come to the auditorium for chapel. And she said they were really upset and they started grumbling and complaining about it because their school day was over and they wanted to relax. But anyway, they had to go. Back in the day, if they called you, you had to go. So they went to the auditorium. She said they went into the building and on the stage was this big, black, ugly woman with a fur wrap that reached all the way down to the floor. She said that was the ugliest thing I had ever laid eyes on in my life. And that was Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune. She said during all of the introductions and the other people getting up speaking, they sat there and snickered and whispered about this ugly woman because they didn't know who she was. So she said they basically just sat there and made fun of her. She said, and then she got up to speak. She said, and when that woman finished speaking, that was the most beautiful creature I had ever laid eyes on. That's how mesmerizing and inspiring Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune had been to those young students. Mrs. Bethune was not what we would aesthetically call a beautiful person on the outside, but from all indication, she was a gem on the inside. Somebody who really cared about her people and understood the need to uplift black people in 1905. She rose to the occasion, she stood in her purpose, and her work is still being rewarded while she has gone on to her eternal rest. The true warriors and revolutionaries of the Black American race have been replaced with athletes and entertainers and comedians and other kinds of sellouts. So we have lost our way in that regard. We don't even think about people like that now. But it's her and people like her that are the building blocks of our history and our culture. They are the reason why Black history is so worth celebrating. So I say rest in peace, Dr. Mary McCleod Bethune. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share the video, and as always, have a great day.